The crisp autumn air of Eugene, Oregon, typically carried with it the scent of pine and damp earth, a comforting aroma that heralded the changing seasons in 1988. But on one particular October evening, that familiar scent was overshadowed by something far more unsettling. A quiet dread began to seep into the community, an insidious unease that started as a whisper and rapidly grew into a clamor of anxious questions. Susan Parker, a beloved elementary school teacher, had vanished. She simply didn't arrive home. Her absence, stark and inexplicable, ripped a hole in the fabric of a town that prided itself on its peaceful rhythms and neighborly bonds. This wasn't merely a missing person. This was Susan, a woman whose every action was rooted in responsibility and care. Her disappearance wasn't just a concern for her family. It was a wound opened in the heart of Eugene, a mystery that would linger, cold and unanswered, for decades, forever altering the perception of safety in this picturesque Oregon town. Susan Parker was, by all accounts, the embodiment of dedication. Her classroom at Riverview Elementary was a vibrant hub of learning, where every child felt seen, heard, and valued. She possessed an uncanny ability to connect with even the most reticent students, her gentle encouragement and unwavering patience coaxing shy smiles and blossoming confidence. Her colleagues respected her not just for her pedagogical skills but for her infectious optimism, her willingness to lend an ear, and her quiet strength. Mornings for Susan began early with a brisk walk, regardless of the weather, followed by a meticulously organized day of lesson plans and student interactions. After school, she often stayed late, grading papers, preparing materials, or offering extra help to a struggling student. Her routine was a comforting constant, a predictable rhythm that anchored her life and the lives of those around her. On that fateful Tuesday in October, her day unfolded with customary normalcy. She taught her lessons, shared her warm laughter with fellow teachers in the staff room, and dismissed her students with her usual bright farewells, their small voices echoing in the hallways as they departed for home. As the afternoon light softened, she gathered her things, locking her classroom door with a familiar click, her mind likely already drifting to the next day's activities or perhaps a book she was eager to finish. No one saw anything out of the ordinary, no lingering figures, no suspicious vehicles. Just Susan, conducting her life with the quiet grace that defined her. Her failure to arrive home was, at first, met with mild confusion, then growing concern, and finally, outright panic. Her husband, David, a man whose steadfast nature mirrored Susan's own, initially dismissed her tardiness as an unexpected late meeting or a flat tire. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, then two, his unease deepened. He called her school, but the lines were busy, or no one answered. He tried her friends, but they hadn't seen her since school let out. The dinner he had prepared, usually a cherished evening ritual, sat forgotten and cooling on the kitchen counter, its warmth slowly fading, mirroring the chilling fear that was rapidly engulfing him. Their grown daughter, Sarah, who lived nearby, rushed over, her own maternal instincts flaring into alarm. Friends and neighbors, alerted by David's frantic calls, began to gather, their faces etched with a shared sense of dread. The air in their cozy living room, usually filled with laughter, was now thick with unspoken anxieties. The initial search efforts were immediate and intensely personal. David, Sarah, and a handful of concerned neighbors piled into cars, retracing Susan's usual route home from school, their headlights cutting through the encroaching dusk. They drove slowly, peering into every shadowy curve of the road, every thicket of trees, their hearts pounding with a desperate hope that she might have simply pulled over, perhaps run out of gas, or become disoriented. But the familiar streets of Eugene offered no sign of her worn sedan. The school parking lot was empty, save for a few stray leaves skittering across the asphalt. Her car, a sensible blue Honda Civic, was nowhere to be found. The lack of any trace, any indication of what might have happened, was what truly terrified them. It was as if she had simply evaporated into the thin Oregon air. The police were called, their initial questions measured and routine, slowly evolving into something more serious as the gravity of the situation became undeniably clear. Search parties formed spontaneously, fueled by a collective refusal to accept the unthinkable. Flashlights pierced the deepening night, voices called out her name, and the quiet streets of Eugene now echoed with the desperate pleas of a community grappling with an unimaginable void. But the night offered no answers, only a deepening mystery and the cold, hard reality that Susan Parker had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and an ever-growing sense of despair. The unsettling disappearance of a beloved teacher, Susan Parker, in Eugene, Oregon, 1988, set a somber tone for a long unsolved mystery, a narrative that continues to unfold, revealing layer after painful layer of truth and deception. If you find yourself drawn to the intricate threads of unexplained mysteries and the enduring pursuit of justice in true crime stories, remember to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring these compelling narratives to light, ensuring that the forgotten are remembered and that every case, no matter how cold, eventually finds its voice. The initial police inquiry into Susan Parker's vanishing began with a surge of standard procedures, but quickly devolved into a frustrating labyrinth of dead ends. Detectives assigned to the case started by methodically tracing Susan's last known movements, hoping to uncover a logical explanation for her absence. They interviewed her colleagues at Riverview Elementary, painstakingly questioning every teacher, administrator, and support staff member who had interacted with her that Tuesday. Each interview painted a consistent picture. Susan had been her usual, composed self. No signs of distress, no hurried phone calls, no unusual conversations. She had left school at her customary time, a small wave to the janitor her last confirmed interaction. The janitor, a man named George who had worked at the school for decades, recalled nothing out of the ordinary, just Mrs. Parker, smiling as she always did, heading to her blue Honda Civic in the near-empty parking lot. Her car, however, was still missing, a significant piece of the puzzle that deepened the mystery rather than clarifying it. Next, investigators turned to her family, specifically David, her husband, and Sarah, her daughter. Their testimonies, while filled with raw grief and fear, provided little in the way of concrete leads. David described a stable, loving marriage with no underlying conflicts or secrets that might prompt Susan to leave voluntarily. Sarah corroborated this, emphasizing her mother's deep commitment to her family and her profession. The idea of Susan simply walking away from her life was not only implausible but entirely out of character for the responsible, predictable woman they knew. Detectives explored every angle, questioning neighbors about any unusual vehicles or strangers seen in the area around their home or the school that afternoon. They checked pawn shops for any items she might have sold, hospitals for unidentified patients, and bus stations for tickets purchased. Each lead, however promising it initially seemed, fizzled out, leaving them with nothing but growing frustration. The early challenges faced by these investigators were immense. In 1988, forensic science was still in its relative infancy compared to modern capabilities. DNA testing was nascent and not widely applied to cold cases, and surveillance technology was practically non-existent. There were no cell phone records to trace, no digital footprints to follow. The absence of clear, tangible evidence was staggering. No forced entry at her home, no struggle reported in the school parking lot, no note, no witnesses to an abduction. It was as if Susan Parker had simply dissolved into the crisp autumn air. Her blue Honda Civic, too, seemed to have vanished without a trace, offering no immediate clues about her direction of travel or any potential accident. The trail, already faint, faded rapidly with each passing hour, then each day, as the elements washed away any residual scents or tracks. The lack of a crime scene made it nearly impossible to glean information, forcing detectives to rely heavily on witness accounts and circumstantial observations, which in this case yielded disappointingly little. The community response was immediate and overwhelming, a testament to Susan's profound impact on Eugene. The news of her disappearance spread like wildfire, igniting a widespread shock and sadness that permeated every corner of the town. Parents whose children Susan had taught were distraught, their concern for her eclipsing their own daily routines. Public appeals for information were broadcast on local television and radio stations, her smiling face, often captured in a school photo, appearing on flyers taped to lampposts and storefronts. Churches held vigils and Local businesses donated resources to aid the search efforts. Volunteer search parties, numbering in the hundreds, formed spontaneously, combing the dense forests, parks, and riverbanks surrounding Eugene. Equipped with maps and flashlights, they meticulously searched every ravine, every abandoned building, their hope waning with each fruitless hour. The vastness of the search area, coupled with the lack of specific directions, made their monumental effort feel like searching for a needle in an impossibly large haystack. Yet they persisted, driven by a collective determination to bring Susan home. The town, usually so tranquil, was consumed by an anxious energy, a palpable sense of unease. Early theories about her disappearance began to circulate, fueled by gossip, fear, and a desperate need for answers. Some speculated that it might have been a random act of violence, a tragic encounter with a stranger, a horrifying possibility that sent shivers through the typically safe community. Others, perhaps hoping for a less sinister explanation, whispered about a planned departure, suggesting Susan might have left of her own volition, seeking a new life away from Eugene, despite all evidence to the contrary. This theory was quickly dismissed by anyone who truly knew Susan, finding it utterly incompatible with her character. A third, more chilling possibility was that someone she knew, perhaps even someone within her trusted circle, was involved. This notion bred a quiet, unsettling distrust, casting shadows of suspicion over friendly faces. Each theory, however, lacked any concrete evidence, leaving the community grappling with an unsettling vacuum of information. The police, while exploring all avenues, were equally stumped. Without a body, without her car, without any witnesses, they were left with nothing but a haunting silence, a void where Susan Parker used to be, and a pervasive sense that justice might never be found. The haunting silence that had settled upon Eugene grew deeper and more profound as weeks bled into months, turning the urgent search for Susan Parker into a cold, lingering mystery. The initial surge of police activity, the frantic volunteer efforts, and the widespread media appeals slowly but inexorably dwindled. The posters with Susan's kind, smiling face, once ubiquitous on every lamppost and shop window, began to fade and peel, their edges curling like forgotten memories. The collective breath held by the community slowly exhaled into a weary acceptance that direct answers were not forthcoming. Despite every effort, every interviewed person, and every inch of terrain meticulously scoured, not a single trace of Susan, or her blue Honda Civic, had been found. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed her whole, leaving behind only the echoing void of her absence. The case, once the most pressing in the Eugene Police Department, gradually transitioned from an active investigation into the grim reality of a cold case, a file folder growing thicker with unsolved inquiries, yet devoid of any new, tangible leads. The initial intensity gave way to a somber routine of occasional check-ins, renewed appeals on anniversaries, and the sad, familiar cycle of hopes raised and then dashed. For Susan's family, the passing of time brought not healing, but a deepening agony. The profound grief they experienced was unlike any other, a unique torment of living with perpetual uncertainty. David, her husband, became a shadow of his former self, his once vibrant spirit dulled by the relentless weight of the unknown. Every sunrise brought the question of where Susan might be, and every sunset left it unanswered. He found himself replaying their last conversations, their last shared moments, searching for any hidden meaning, any overlooked clue that might reveal her fate. The house that once resonated with Susan's laughter and warmth now felt hollow, filled with her unspoken presence and the crushing silence of her absence. Her side of the bed remained untouched, her favorite mug still in the cupboard, stark reminders of a life abruptly paused. Sarah, their daughter, struggled with her own complex grief, a mixture of sorrow, anger, and a desperate yearning for closure. She imagined her mother every day, wondering if she was in pain, if she was alone, if she still thought of them. The inability to mourn properly, to have a funeral, to say a final goodbye, was a cruel form of torture, leaving an open wound that refused to heal. Birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries became painful markers of her continued absence, shadows cast upon celebrations that felt incomplete without her. Every ringing phone brought a jolt of hope, quickly extinguished by the familiar disappointment of a wrong number or a telemarketer. This perpetual state of limbo, the constant oscillation between hope and despair, exacted a heavy toll on their mental and emotional well-being, eroding their sense of safety and trust in the world. Their lives were forever bisected into a before Susan vanished and an after Susan vanished, the latter defined by an agonizing, unresolvable question mark. The official transition of Susan Parker's case into a cold case file was a bureaucratic necessity, but for a small cadre of dedicated detectives, it felt like a personal failure. The physical file, a thick manila folder brimming with witness statements, police reports, and dead-end leads, was moved from active investigation shelves to the hallowed, often dusty, archives of unsolved mysteries. However, for a few individuals within the Eugene Police Department, Susan's case was never truly forgotten. Detective Miller, a gruff but compassionate officer who had been one of the lead investigators in 1988, carried the weight of Susan's disappearance like a personal burden. He would occasionally pull the file, poring over the same old reports, hoping a new set of eyes, or his own more experienced ones, might suddenly uncover a detail previously overlooked. He kept a small photo of Susan on his desk, her bright smile a constant reminder of the life that had been so cruelly interrupted. The younger detectives, those who joined the force years after Susan vanished, sometimes heard hushed whispers about the Parker case, the one that got away, the one that haunted the department. It became a benchmark, a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the cases that defied every investigative effort. These determined few understood that while the world moved on, the victim and their family remained frozen in time, their pursuit of answers unceasing. The file might be shelved, but the human story it contained, the unanswered questions it posed, continued to resonate within the precinct, a silent promise that some mysteries, even after decades, deserved another look. The disappearance of Susan Parker continued to cast a long, lingering shadow over the entire community of Eugene. What began as an acute shock gradually morphed into a pervasive, underlying current of unease. The town that had once prided itself on its idyllic charm and safety now carried the indelible mark of a sinister unknown. Parents became more vigilant, children were kept on a tighter leash, and doors that were once left unlocked were now double-bolted. The carefree innocence that had characterized Eugene in the late 1980s was subtly, yet irrevocably, lost. Every anecdote about Susan, every remembrance of her kindness, served as a stark reminder of her unexplained absence. Her name would occasionally surface in local newspaper articles, usually on anniversaries of her disappearance, sparking renewed discussions among residents, each person offering their own theory, their own sense of bewildered sorrow. Public spaces, once bustling with uninhibited joy, seemed to carry a faint echo of caution, a subconscious vigilance that had not existed before. The annual school events, particularly at Riverview Elementary, always felt a little incomplete, a small segment of the community's collective heart forever missing its beloved teacher. The story of Susan Parker became a local legend, not one of heroics, but of unanswered questions, a stark illustration of how easily life could be upended, how quickly safety could be shattered, and how deeply a community could be scarred by a mystery that defied resolution. The lingering shadow served as a constant, quiet reminder that justice, sometimes, takes an agonizingly long time to find its light. The passage of time, an indifferent and relentless river, flowed past the unsolved mystery of Susan Parker. Decades peeled away from the calendar, transforming the world around it with dizzying speed. The late 1980s, with its rotary phones and nascent internet, receded into history, replaced by an era of ubiquitous digital connectivity and unprecedented technological leaps. Children who were Susan's pupils in 1988 had grown into middle-aged adults, some with children of their own attending the very same Riverview Elementary. Eugene itself expanded, new neighborhoods springing up, old landmarks shifting and changing, but the core memory of Susan's disappearance remained, a quiet ache in the town's collective consciousness. While the immediate shock had faded, the underlying question persisted, a subtle dissonance beneath the surface of everyday life. The original detectives on the case had retired, their files passed on, their memories of the frustration and the lingering doubt still vivid, Yet, for all the societal shifts and advancements, the Parker case remained stubbornly, chillingly cold, a testament to the elusive nature of truth when evidence is scarce and leads vanish into thin air. The story became a local legend, passed down through generations, a cautionary tale of unexplained loss. However, the relentless march of technological innovation, particularly in the realm of forensic science, began to offer a glimmer of hope for cases long deemed unsolvable. The early 2000s saw the rapid evolution of DNA analysis, moving beyond basic blood typing to sophisticated profiling capable of extracting minute genetic material from the most degraded samples. What was once considered impossible, identifying an individual from a single hair follicle or a microscopic skin cell, became not only feasible but increasingly routine. New techniques for analyzing trace evidence, from advanced fingerprinting methods to refined toxicology screens, provided unprecedented tools for investigators. The very concept of a cold case began to transform, no longer signifying an abandoned cause but rather a puzzle awaiting the application of cutting-edge science. Databases of criminal DNA profiles grew exponentially, creating a vast network for comparison, a digital net that promised to ensnare perpetrators who had long believed themselves to be beyond reach. This scientific renaissance presented an opportunity, a second chance for cases like Susan Parker's, allowing investigators to revisit old evidence with truly fresh eyes, armed with capabilities their predecessors could only have dreamed of. This burgeoning field offered the tantalizing possibility that even the most stubborn mysteries could eventually yield to scientific scrutiny, bringing justice to victims and closure to families. It was against this backdrop of burgeoning scientific capability that renewed interest in Susan Parker's case began to stir within the Eugene Police Department. A small, dedicated team of cold case detectives, a unit established to systematically review unsolved crimes, decided to pull Susan's file from the archives. This team, comprised of younger officers who had not been part of the original investigation and seasoned veterans who knew the lingering pain of unsolved cases, brought a vital blend of fresh perspective and institutional memory. Detective Lena Hansen, a sharp, methodical investigator with a background in forensic pathology, spearheaded the review. She was driven by a quiet but fierce conviction that every victim deserved an answer, regardless of how much time had passed. Alongside her was Detective Mark Jensen, a meticulous researcher who had a knack for finding connections others missed. Neither of them had worked the original case, providing a pivotal emotional distance that allowed for objective reevaluation, free from the biases or frustrations that might have plagued the initial investigators. They saw not a hopeless enigma, but a challenge, an opportunity to apply the latest breakthroughs to a deeply entrenched mystery. Their shared commitment forged a formidable partnership, united by the ghost of Susan Parker and the weight of her unanswered questions. The initial steps in their reinvestigation were painstaking, a meticulous journey back in time, sifting through the physical remnants of a tragedy from another era. The old manila folder, now brittle and faded, was carefully opened. Inside lay decades-old police reports, typewritten witness statements, grainy black and white photographs of the school parking lot, and meticulously labeled evidence bags, some containing items that had languished untouched for years. Detectives Hansen and Jensen approached each document, each piece of evidence, with a reverence for detail and a critical, modern sensibility. They began by digitizing every scrap of paper, creating a searchable database that allowed for cross-referencing and pattern recognition that would have been impossible in 1988. They reviewed the original witness statements, not just for what was said, but for what might have been omitted, for subtle inconsistencies that might now, with the benefit of hindsight and new understanding, become significant. Crime scene photos were digitally enhanced, revealing details unnoticed or unappreciated in their original form. They meticulously charted Susan's last known movements again, comparing it to historical traffic patterns and local events of that day, looking for any anomaly a modern algorithm might flag. This intensive, almost archaeological process of reconstruction became their primary focus, a silent vow to leave no stone unturned in their quest to finally bring Susan Parker home, not in body, perhaps, but in truth and in justice. It was a slow, arduous process, demanding patience and an unwavering belief that somewhere within these dusty files lay the key to unlocking a 30-year-old secret. The painstaking process of re-examining the evidence, sifting through the physical remnants of a tragedy from another era, eventually led to a critical piece of evidence resurfacing, an item so seemingly minor and overlooked in the original investigation that its full significance had been completely missed 3 decades ago. Tucked away in an old, brittle evidence bag, labeled simply, "Fibers from driver's seat," Detectives Hansen and Jensen discovered a tiny, almost microscopic fragment of material. In 1988, forensic technology could, at best, identify its general fabric type and color, yielding little investigative value. It was logged, photographed, and then filed away as another dead end. But under modern scrutiny, with the aid of advanced microscopy and chemical analysis, this seemingly insignificant fiber now held incredible potential. Hansen carefully retrieved it, her gloved fingers trembling slightly with a mixture of anticipation and professional hope. Her predecessor's meticulous, if limited, documentation had preserved it perfectly. This fiber, no larger than a speck of dust to the naked eye, underwent a battery of tests in the state-of-the-art forensic lab. Advances in material science allowed the analysts to determine its exact composition, a specific blend of synthetic polymer and natural wool, dyed with a unique, custom-blended pigment not mass-produced. Even more critically, the fiber bore microscopic traces of human skin cells, infinitesimally small but undeniably present. This was the breakthrough, the electric jolt that sent a wave of renewed urgency through the cold case team. The forensic analysis yielded not just a unique fiber profile, but a crucial DNA lead pointing towards an unknown individual. The skin cells, though degraded, contained enough viable genetic material for a partial DNA profile to be constructed, a male profile. It was not a complete print, but it was enough to be distinctive, a genetic signature that had been silently waiting for 30 years to be discovered. The lab results landed on Hansen's desk like a bombshell, shattering the decades of silence surrounding Susan Parker's disappearance. The initial excitement was palpable, quickly tempered by the daunting reality of what came next. They had a DNA profile, but no name matched it. The next step was immediate and critical: database searches. The partial DNA profile, painstakingly extracted and analyzed, was uploaded to CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, which houses genetic information from federal, state, and local forensic laboratories across the United States. This national database was a game-changer for cold cases, a resource unimaginable in 1988. Jensen meticulously oversaw the upload, a quiet intensity in his gaze. The system processed the data, running it against millions of existing profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and unsolved crime scene evidence. The hours stretched into days, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension in the cold case unit. Every notification, every email from the lab, was met with a collective hold of breath. They knew the odds were against them: a partial profile, an unknown suspect from decades ago. It was still a long shot. But they also knew this was their best, perhaps only, chance. The database compared genetic markers, sifting through the vast digital haystack for any potential overlap, any thread that might connect this unknown male to the endless tapestry of recorded criminal activity. The process was automated, yet felt deeply personal, as if the very system held the secret to Susan's fate. Then, after what felt like an eternity, came the notification. Not a full match, not yet, but a familial match, a tentative hit indicating a close biological relative of the unknown suspect was already in the database. The system flagged a male individual, incarcerated for a completely unrelated, nonviolent offense committed years after Susan Parker vanished, as a likely first-degree relative to the DNA found on the fiber. This was it. This was the first hit they had been waiting for, the digital thread finally leading them out of the labyrinthine darkness. The name of the incarcerated individual was quickly identified, and through genealogical research and public records, his family tree began to unfold. This allowed the detectives to narrow down potential suspects to a specific branch of the family, most notably to the individual's father. The jolt that went through the cold case team was undeniable. The name that emerged, after careful cross-referencing and background checks, was one that sent a wave of shock through the room. It was a name not unfamiliar to the community, not as a criminal, but as someone established, someone respected. The air crackled with a renewed sense of urgency, and a palpable shift in the investigation's momentum. After 30 years, the silence of the Parker case was finally being broken, not by a confession or a forgotten witness, but by a microscopic fiber, a testament to the patient, unwavering power of modern science and the determined few who believe that no case is ever truly cold. This tentative match was the crack in the dam, unleashing a torrent of new possibilities and igniting the investigation with a blazing fire, ready to reveal the hidden truth. The meticulous work of connecting the familial DNA match to a specific individual began immediately, a delicate dance of forensic science and old-fashioned detective work. The familial hit identified the incarcerated son, but the detective's sights were fixed on his father, the most likely biological source of the DNA found on the fiber. Detective Hansen and Jensen, armed with the tentative genetic link, embarked on the painstaking process of confirming his identity. Public records, old phone books, and employment histories were meticulously cross-referenced. The father's name was Rick Thompson, a man who, in 1988, had been a long-haul truck driver, a seemingly unremarkable detail until now. He had lived in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Eugene, not far from Susan Parker's own home, and even closer to Riverview Elementary. This geographical proximity, coupled with the DNA evidence, painted a chilling picture. The initial background checks revealed no prior arrests for violent crimes, no obvious red flags that would have raised suspicion during the original 1988 investigation. He was, to all outward appearances, a normal, contributing member of society, a family man with a steady job. The shocking revelation of Rick Thompson's potential involvement rippled through the cold case unit. He wasn't some transient stranger, nor a disgruntled former colleague. He was someone completely unexpected, a figure whose public persona was one of understated respectability. He had been a churchgoer, a volunteer for local community events, a man who kept to himself but was generally regarded as polite and unassuming. The idea that this seemingly ordinary man could be connected to Susan Parker's disappearance was difficult for even the seasoned detectives to reconcile. It challenged their preconceptions, proving once again that evil often wears the most unremarkable of masks. The initial tentative match had been a jolt, but seeing his name, his face, knowing his life had continued on normally for 30 years while Susan's family suffered, ignited a quiet fury within the team. The puzzle pieces, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, were slowly starting to click into place, revealing a mosaic far darker than anyone had imagined. They understood that this new lead would shatter the community's perception of Rick Thompson, replacing years of neighborly assumption with a terrifying truth. With Rick Thompson now identified as their prime suspect, the detectives meticulously set about building an airtight case. This was not merely about an arrest. It was about securing a conviction, ensuring that justice, delayed for so long, would not be denied. Discreet surveillance was initiated, observing Thompson's daily routines, his interactions, hoping to glean any information or observe any behavior that might corroborate their theory. Every move he made was documented, every phone call logged, every casual conversation analyzed. While the DNA was a powerful piece of evidence, they knew they needed more. They needed to tie him directly to Susan Parker, to establish motive, opportunity, and means beyond the genetic link. Detectives pored over old police reports, searching for any mention of Rick Thompson from 1988, any peripheral connection, however tenuous, that might have been overlooked. They interviewed his former coworkers from the trucking company, his old neighbors, anyone who might have known him 3 decades earlier. They asked subtle, probing questions, careful not to tip their hand, painting a picture of Thompson's life at the time of Susan's disappearance. They wanted to understand his habits, his temperament, any secrets he might have harbored back then. This painstaking corroboration was paramount, ensuring that when they finally moved, they would do so with overwhelming certainty. The web of deceit began to unravel slowly, thread by painful thread. As detectives delved deeper into Rick Thompson's past, a darker image of the seemingly respectable man began to emerge, revealing a hidden life and potential motives that chilled them to the bone. While his public face was benign, interviews with estranged family members and former associates hinted at a more volatile, controlling personality beneath the surface. Whispers of a history of aggressive behavior, never officially reported or prosecuted, began to surface. Court records from separate jurisdictions revealed a few minor infractions, restraining orders filed by past romantic partners after Susan's disappearance, all pointing to a pattern of possessiveness and anger management issues. One former girlfriend, speaking anonymously, described Thompson as having an obsessive streak, particularly when he felt rejected or ignored. The detectives theorized that this might have been a crucial component of his interaction with Susan. Perhaps a casual acquaintance, a harmless conversation, had been misinterpreted or taken to an unhealthy extreme by Thompson. It was not uncommon for individuals with such tendencies to project their desires onto others, and then react violently when those desires were not reciprocated. The location of the fiber, found on the driver's seat of Susan's car, strongly suggested he had been inside her vehicle, a scenario that painted a grim picture of her final moments. The motive, still murky, appeared to lie in a calculated act of opportunity, perhaps fueled by a twisted sense of entitlement, or a sudden, uncontrollable rage. Thompson's trucking routes frequently took him past Riverview Elementary. It was conceivable he had observed Susan's routine, her predictable departure times. The discovery of the fiber, and the subsequent DNA match strongly indicated a struggle within the confines of her own car. The blue Honda Civic, which had disappeared with Susan, was still unaccounted for, a ghost in itself. The detectives believed Thompson had not only abducted Susan but had also disposed of her vehicle, a cunning act that had successfully hidden his crime for decades. This dark truth, hidden beneath a polished facade of normalcy and quiet living, was now being painstakingly pieced together. The more they uncovered, the more horrifying the picture became. The man who had walked freely through Eugene for 30 years, living his life while a family grieved in agonizing uncertainty, was not the man everyone assumed him to be. The quiet, unassuming neighbor was, in all likelihood, the architect of a deeply personal and horrific crime, a predator hiding in plain sight. The evidence, though painstakingly gathered over weeks of intense work, was now overwhelming. The stage was set for the next, dramatic phase of this long-dormant investigation. The time had come for justice to knock on Rick Thompson's door. The time had finally come for justice to knock on Rick Thompson's door, and the meticulously planned arrest unfolded with precise execution. Early one crisp morning, under the pale, pre-dawn light, a convoy of unmarked police vehicles converged on a quiet suburban street, lights flashing silently in the rearview windows as they approached Thompson's modest ranch-style home. Plainclothes officers, their faces grim and determined, took positions around the perimeter, securing the area. A specialized arrest team, led by Detective Hansen, approached the front door. The element of surprise was critical. They wanted no chance for him to flee or destroy any potential last-minute evidence. The knock was sharp and authoritative, echoing in the stillness of the morning. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a groggy Rick Thompson, still in his pajamas, his face registering a flicker of confusion before it hardened into recognition as he saw the badges and the unwavering expressions of the officers. "Rick Thompson, you're under arrest for the murder of Susan Parker," Detective Hansen stated, her voice devoid of emotion, cutting through the silence of the early hour. The words hung in the air, transforming the sleepy morning into a scene of stark, irreversible reality. His initial confusion gave way to a chillingly calm demeanor, a mask of indifference that did little to hide the tremor in his hands as he was read his rights and led away in handcuffs. The neighbors, slowly emerging for their morning routines, watched in stunned disbelief as the seemingly ordinary man from down the street was escorted into a police vehicle, marking the dramatic culmination of decades of unanswered prayers and relentless police work. This apprehension, broadcast across local news channels, sent shockwaves through Eugene, bringing to an end 30 years of agonizing speculation and fear. The community reaction was immediate and overwhelming, a tempest of emotions that had long been suppressed. News of Rick Thompson's arrest spread like wildfire, igniting a dizzying mix of relief, disbelief, anger, and profound sadness. For many longtime residents, especially those who remembered Susan and her disappearance, it was a moment of surreal catharsis. Relief washed over them at the thought that the monster who had taken their beloved teacher might finally be brought to justice. Yet, disbelief was equally profound. "Rick Thompson? No, not Rick," was a common phrase heard across coffee shop counters and grocery store aisles. He was a familiar face, a man whose presence in the community had been unremarkable, easily blending into the background of everyday life. This made the accusation all the more chilling, shattering the illusion of safety and trust many had held on to for decades. Anger simmered beneath the surface, anger at the injustice, at the years of torment Susan's family had endured, and at Thompson himself for living an apparently normal life, while his secret festered. And beneath it all, a deep, pervasive sadness, a rekindled grief for Susan Parker, a woman whose vibrant life had been so cruelly cut short. The arrest didn't just solve a cold case. It ripped open old wounds, forcing the community to confront a brutal truth they had long hoped would never materialize. The once tranquil facade of Eugene was momentarily shattered, replaced by a raw, collective reckoning. As the legal process began, the painful truth of Susan's final moments and the horrifying circumstances of her death were slowly, agonizingly, brought to light. During pretrial hearings and through leaked investigative details, the fragments of the past coalesced into a coherent and utterly devastating narrative. Detectives revealed that the fiber found in Susan's car definitively linked Thompson to the vehicle. Further investigation, including advanced soil analysis near Thompson's former properties and deep-dive archival research, led them to a secluded, overgrown wooded area on the outskirts of Eugene. There, after weeks of careful searching, a partially preserved human skull and skeletal remains were discovered, buried shallowly beneath a thick canopy of old-growth trees. Forensic odontologists confirmed through dental records that the remains belonged to Susan Parker. The discovery sent another wave of sorrow through the family and community, finally providing a long-dreaded, yet desperately needed, answer to her physical fate. The autopsy, though challenged by the passage of time and decomposition, indicated blunt force trauma as the likely cause of death, suggesting a violent struggle. Investigators hypothesized that Thompson, having perhaps observed Susan's routine, had approached her in the school parking lot, possibly under the pretense of needing assistance, or simply engaging in a casual conversation. The fiber evidence strongly suggested he had gotten into her car. It was believed that a struggle ensued, likely after she rebuffed his advances or realized his intentions, leading to her tragic death. The specific details, such as the exact motive or the duration of the struggle, remained obscured by the lack of direct witnesses, but the physical evidence painted a grim picture of a brutal, opportunistic act. Thompson had then, they believed, driven her car to the remote location, buried her remains, and meticulously disposed of the vehicle, which was eventually located years later in a salvage yard hundreds of miles away under a false VIN, effectively erasing its connection to Susan. The painstaking work of forensic anthropologists provided additional details, reconstructing the likely sequence of events, painting a vivid and harrowing portrait of Susan's final, terrifying moments. It was a truth that offered no comfort, only the stark reality of evil. With the discovery of Susan's remains and the overwhelming forensic evidence, the focus shifted entirely to the legal proceedings. Justice, long deferred, was now formally sought. The district attorney's office announced its intention to pursue a first-degree murder charge, a decision met with widespread approval from a grieving and outraged community. The legal process began with a flurry of motions, evidentiary hearings, and the meticulous selection of a jury, a process that aimed to ensure fairness while acknowledging the deeply emotional nature of the case. Susan's family, particularly David and Sarah, were a constant, dignified presence in the courtroom. Their faces, etched with decades of sorrow, served as a poignant reminder of the human cost of the crime. They sat through every agonizing detail, every forensic photograph, every chilling piece of testimony, enduring the painful reliving of their darkest fears. Their quiet strength resonated throughout the courtroom, a testament to their unwavering determination to see justice served for the woman they loved and lost. The community, desperate for accountability, keenly followed every development. Local news provided daily updates, and the courthouse steps became a gathering point for vigils and expressions of solidarity. The trial of Rick Thompson was not just a legal battle, it was a societal reckoning, a demand that after 30 years, the scales of justice finally balance, bringing peace to Susan Parker's memory and a measure of closure to the town that had never forgotten her. This monumental undertaking represented a collective vow that Susan's life, and her tragic ending, would not be in vain, and that her perpetrator would finally face the consequences of his heinous actions. The monumental undertaking continued, a collective vow that Susan's life, and her tragic ending, would not be in vain, and that her perpetrator would finally face the consequences of his heinous actions. The criminal trial of Rick Thompson gripped the city of Eugene, dominating headlines and conversations for weeks. The courtroom became a poignant arena where 3 decades of silence and speculation were finally confronted with irrefutable facts. The prosecution, led by a formidable district attorney, delivered a powerful and methodical presentation of evidence. They began by establishing Susan Parker's character, painting a vivid picture of a beloved teacher, a devoted wife, and a cherished mother, ensuring the jury understood the magnitude of the life that had been stolen. Then came the forensic masterpiece, the microscopic fiber, enlarged on massive screens, depicting the unique blend of synthetic and natural materials, followed by the undeniable DNA profile carefully extracted from the epidermal cells clinging to it. Experts testified with scientific precision, explaining how this tiny piece of evidence, once overlooked, had become the linchpin of the entire case, linking Thompson definitively to Susan's car. The discovery of Susan's remains was presented next, accompanied by the heart-wrenching testimony of the forensic anthropologist who had meticulously identified her. The skull, with its undeniable signs of blunt force trauma, spoke volumes about the violence of her last moments. Maps and photographs illustrated the secluded burial site, connecting it to Thompson's known movements and properties. Witnesses from the old trucking company testified to his route, placing him in the vicinity of Riverview Elementary on the day of Susan's disappearance. Former girlfriends and neighbors, their voices filled with a mixture of fear and conviction, described Thompson's hidden temper, his possessive tendencies, and his capacity for anger, chipping away at the facade of the quiet, unassuming man. The narrative woven by the prosecution was chillingly coherent. Thompson, an opportunistic predator, had encountered Susan, perhaps made an unwelcome advance, and in a fit of rage or to silence her, had brutally murdered her, then meticulously disposed of her body and car, believing he had outsmarted justice. The defense attempted to discredit the DNA evidence, claiming contamination or misidentification, and painted an alternative scenario of an unknown assailant, suggesting that Thompson was merely a convenient scapegoat. However, their arguments crumbled under the weight of the overwhelming scientific and circumstantial evidence. Every piece connected, every detail corroborated, leaving little room for doubt. The jury, after days of deliberation that felt like an eternity to Susan's family, returned with their verdict. The word, "guilty," echoed through the packed courtroom, a solemn affirmation that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. Rick Thompson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The roar of relief from the gallery was immediate, quickly followed by sobs of grief and quiet embraces. Susan's family, their faces streaked with tears, held each other tightly. It was a bittersweet moment, the ultimate culmination of a 3-decade-long quest. The sentencing phase saw Thompson receive the maximum penalty, life imprisonment without parole. The gavel's final strike brought a definitive end to the criminal proceedings, closing the longest and most painful chapter in their lives. The conviction and sentence brought a profound sense of finality to Susan Parker's case, an acknowledgement that her life mattered, and that the person responsible for ending it would pay the ultimate price within the justice system. For the community of Eugene, it was a collective sigh of relief, a moment to exhale after holding its breath for so long, finally knowing the truth. This bittersweet closure for Susan's family and friends was palpable. There were hugs, tears, and quiet conversations outside the courthouse, but no true celebration. How could there be? While justice had been served, even after so many agonizing years, the pain of loss remained, a deep, unhealing wound. David, Susan's husband, his hair now white, his shoulders stooped with the weight of years, spoke to the press with a voice thick with emotion. He thanked the cold case detectives, the forensic scientists, and the legal team, acknowledging their tireless dedication. He spoke of Susan, not as a victim, but as the vibrant, loving woman she was, her memory now etched permanently in history with the truth finally revealed. Sarah, Susan's daughter, now a mother herself, spoke of the immense void her mother's absence had left, but also of the strength and resilience she had found in her mother's enduring spirit. They understood that no verdict, no prison sentence, could bring Susan back. The gaping hole in their lives would never truly close. But knowing the truth, having an answer, and seeing her killer held accountable, offered a measure of peace, a quiet solace that transcended the ongoing grief. It was the ability to finally, truly grieve without the corrosive uncertainty, to honor her memory with the dignity she deserved. The long shadow of the unknown had finally lifted, replaced by the stark clarity of truth. The legacy of Susan Parker, however, extended far beyond the tragic circumstances of her death and the ultimate conviction of her killer. Her story became a powerful testament to the tireless, often unseen, work of cold case investigators and the enduring, unwavering hope for justice. It highlighted how forensic science, specifically advances in DNA technology coupled with genealogical investigative methods, had revolutionized law enforcement's ability to solve the most intractable mysteries. Susan's case gave renewed hope to countless other families grappling with similar unsolved disappearances, demonstrating that time, while a formidable adversary, was not an insurmountable one. Her life, marked by dedication, kindness, and an infectious love for teaching, also served as a reminder of the profound impact one individual can have on a community. The outpouring of grief and affection from Eugene residents, even after decades, underscored the deep marks she had left on her students, her colleagues, and her neighbors. Detective Hansen and Jensen, who had spearheaded the reinvestigation, became reluctant heroes, their meticulous efforts not only solving a 30-year-old murder but also validating the importance of preserving cold case files and continuously applying new scientific advancements. Susan Parker's name, once synonymous with a haunting mystery, now stands as a symbol of perseverance, scientific triumph, and the unwavering pursuit of truth, ensuring that even in the darkest of moments, justice can eventually find its light. And so, the story of Susan Parker, the beloved teacher who vanished from Eugene, Oregon, in 1988, finally reaches its conclusion. It is a story of profound loss, agonizing uncertainty, and ultimately, of a hard-won justice that spanned generations. We thank you for joining us on this journey, for listening to Susan's story, and for understanding the enduring power of truth. If you found this compelling narrative as impactful as we did, please remember to like this video, share it with others who appreciate true crime stories, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to bring these complex and human stories to light, honoring the victims and celebrating the relentless pursuit of justice. Stay tuned, because next time, we'll delve into another chilling mystery, a case that will once again challenge your perceptions and leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.